Hi, everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on today's podcast, I have Joshua Hood as my guest. So Josh has a great background. He was in the Army with the 82nd Airborne, serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. After the military, he was in law enforcement, in the SWAT team in Memphis, Tennessee. And now he's writing full-time thrillers, Search and Destroy, the Black Ops thriller series, as well as the Robert Ludlum's The Treadstone Resurrection books. I'm excited to talk to Josh. Good morning, Josh. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And so like I said in the intro, you have many years as a soldier and in law enforcement. Now you're writing. How was that transition like, and what led you to sitting down and trying to write your own book?
I'd always wanted to be a writer. As far back as I can remember. And it was one of those things where it wasn't really considered a real job. So I went to college and, it's like saying, I want to be an astronaut or something. My mom would say, well, you're going to have to find some way to pay the bills. So I went to college. I majored in English, got out college, enlisted in the military. And then somewhere along the lines, I just kept thinking about, now I have something to write about. And that's how the first book started, just getting out of the military. I joined the sheriff's department, and I felt that, from Iraq, Afghanistan, I had something to write about. So that's how it got started. So the painful journey began.
And when you were writing and when you were still working in law enforcement, did your fellow officers, did they know that you were writing, and or did you keep it kind of a secret?
No, they knew. We were a really tight team, and so everybody, I spent probably more time with them than I did with my family for the 8 or 9 years I was on the SWAT team. And so they used to give me, the little jokes like, who do you think you are, like Bill Shakespeare, and those types of things. But they were very supportive. And it was one of those things is once I told them that, I was kind of doing that, failure really wasn't an option, because in those types of communities, we tend to eat our young. So I didn't want to be like, I'll write a book and then just quit. So I just, kept going at it, and eventually was able to get one published.
Yeah, I was checking out your website. Excuse me. The in your blog, Under the Hood, I love the posts you have there for writers. I highly recommend check that out. And you went through over 80 rejections. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey, about how that all played out, and how you kept going with all that rejection?
Well, when I came into writing, I didn't know anything. So, I did a lot of the research online. Back then they had, and I'm sure they still do, it's like a phone book that has all the agents in it. I can't remember what it's called, but you just I go through there, and at the beginning it says you got to write a query letter. I didn't know what that was. So you learn that. And then you find out that you have to have an agent before you can get published. And so I started sending out all these query letters, and I think I had made a list of all the agents in the genre and basically started submitting and went through the list, and there was all rejections. And I just started back over from the top. And, it was the 82nd time I actually got signed by an agent. And I think by the end of the week, we'd sold Clear by Fire, and they'd asked for another one. So it was just, perseverance, I think, in my personal case, just refusing to, give up. But also it was a great learning experience, because you learn, having to come up that way, I kind of learned, had to learn everything myself. So it was kind of like I didn't have anybody that said, hey, call this guy, he can help you out. So I learned a lot about the business and what I needed to do better as a writer, what, editors and agents were looking for in submissions and in books.
Well, so yeah, 82 rejections, and you're in the 82nd Airborne. That's kind of, did that
I know,
not
it's
on
my
you?
lucky number. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. So yeah, so it took such a long time, and then all of a sudden, does it move pretty fast? Then once you got the contract, and do you have the books already written, or?
Well, I had the first book written, and then you kind of go through the editing process with the editor who buys it, and then um, there's a saying that you have however long you spent years to write your first book, and then you have like 8 months to write the next, and so that was kind of a shock. And then it, especially with Ludlum, it's one of those things that it didn't sink in right away. It didn't even sink in when my first book was at a bookstore. I was like, oh my God, that's me. And then the journey has just kind of gotten better from there.
And so for our listeners who might not be familiar with your work, can you describe what they can expect reading one of your books?
I think the best way I could sum it up is what I have on the website. I try and write a book that's, all killer, no filler. I like to read fast-paced books that are action dominated and, very kinetic books. I try to make them as visual as possible, thinking to myself, when I'm writing, I try to picture it like I would see a movie, I guess. So my books, I try to make them as visual and as visceral as possible, and hook the reader's attention with as much action and intrigue as possible.
Yeah, I really love that about your books and the newer books coming out now. And not to sound blasphemous, because I love Tom Clancy and Robert Ludlum and those guys, but like the work that you're doing, and Mark Cameron and Mark Greaney. I mean, there's so much more action and things move a lot faster. As a reader, I enjoy those a lot. Whereas the older books sometimes got really deep into the technical stuff. It got a little slow at times.
Well, Mark Greaney is a good friend of mine. He lives in Memphis here, and he's always been a mentor, a great sounding board, a phenomenal author, just phenomenal skill set. Mark Cameron's another one, and that's one of the great things about the thriller community is every author, no matter if they're just starting out or if they've been in the game for a while, they go out of their way to help you out. And Mark's, especially, he wrote Clancy while he was writing the Gray Man novels, and they're two totally different books. You have the Court Gentry, all the Gray Man, which is faster, like you said, but he also did write the slower, longer books. And so I think personally, in my opinion, there's so many options in books out there. And I think that people, especially now with Corona, et cetera, it's so your personal time is so limited. And so I try to be cognizant of that and, write a book that you could read on a plane. And it's not like Elmore Leonard says, just don't write the part that people skip.
Yeah, I love that line from him. Yeah. And so, how did Search and Destroy come to being? Then was that the first one? That was your first book, was in that series, right?
Right, Clear by Fire, and then the next one was Warning Order, and then I did a little ghost writing in between there, and then the Treadstone opportunity came up. Actually, Mark Greaney and Mark Cameron's editor, and now my editor, Tom Colgan over at Penguin, is kind of the master of these estate books. Mm-hmm. And he is just, I don't know, I thought he's picked such great authors before that I thought it was kind of it was a joke when he was picking me for this Ludlum thing. I was like, you sure? You feeling all right, Tom? And, but, he, getting picked for that by him gave me a lot of confidence, because I know, he's been doing this for so long. He's edited so many great books. He behind so many great authors that he has a discerning palate when it comes to this, and to be even considered for a Ludlum book, but also to be considered by Tom was just. It really gave me the confidence to step out and say, well, if he thinks I can do it, let's give it a try. But then stepping into the Ludlum world was a whole different, ball of wax that came with its own pressure after the initial high kind of, because I've always been a fan of Robert Ludlum, was always been a fan of Bourne. I feel that, Jason Bourne is, America's James Bond. And so I always felt it didn't sink in right away, but once I started writing, it was kind of like I was borrowing Mr. Ludlum's Bentley, and I didn't want to be the one who wrecked it,
Oh, so you had access to some of the estate toys.
No, I just felt that, he put such a legacy together, and even coming in and being able to write about Treadstone and everything else, it felt like, like I said, like I'm borrowing like this super expensive car that he's, and like, hey, you don't want to be the guy who brings it back with a huge scratch or a dent in it. Be like, sorry about that one. And like, all those Bourne books were really great except for that Treadstone. Yeesh. And but it is a great opportunity, and I've never had so much fun writing a book before.
Yeah, I was always curious about that, how that all came into being. And I also interviewed Mark Cameron, and he had mentioned the same thing, that you don't, it's not a job that you can seek yourself. They come to you. So that's, like you said, that must have been a huge honor.
Well, it was. And like I said, I thought it was kind of a joke at first. And I was like, you had the right number. And it is one of those things that just like comes out of the blue. And I never in a million years would have thought about, ever being in this position. I guess probably if I'd thought more of it, you might have been one of those things where you kind of like, maybe I shouldn't jump off this cliff. It's really high. But in the moment, it just comes out of nowhere. You're like, this is, what every author lives for. And you step into it, and it's only kind of later that you realize, like I said, that you're becoming part of this legacy. And it was a humbling experience, but I don't know. I think that maybe, it's still surreal, the way it happens. I'm sure you've talked to Mark about it, Mark Graney as well, and some other people. It just comes out of nowhere. You're just like, you're not expecting it. And I was lucky in that with Treadstone, I kind of had a blank slate. Because there was nothing that had been written about it or Treadstone besides a little bit on Bourne in the movies. And so having that creative freedom was really, really awesome.
Okay, yeah, cool. I was wondering about that. Like if they like if you had to come up with the story yourself, or they like provided like an outline. So that's interesting. So it's kind of like a blank slate. Cool.
Right. And the character and kind of the plot of the first book just came up over a 30-minute conversation on the phone. And luckily I had recently read the first Bourne. And, for me, I was thinking that most people now would probably consider the Jason Bourne of the movies as opposed to the books. And so that's the avenue that I took was, what about how do you make a character that can stand in the same limelight as Jason Bourne? And so what was so brilliant about Mr. Ludlum was that, he made this assassin who did bad things, but he can't remember. So you're rooting for him. And so that was the hardest challenge at the very beginning was how do you make an assassin who's paid to kill people likable? And so that was the original challenge. Like, well, how would you even tell that story?
Yeah, well, he did a great job, because I really enjoyed the Treadstone Resurrection. That's why after I finished reading it, I'm like, I gotta see if I can get this guy on my podcast. So it was highly recommended to the listeners to go get that book, get your other books.
Well, thank you. I just turned in the second one not too long ago, so that should be coming out, I think, February 2nd of next year. And it's always an honor just to come and talk about being a writer, or the process, etc. Because when I was starting out, there wasn't a lot of that out there. You just kind of go blindly into it, and just to think about where I started and to be here now talking to you about writing a Robert Ludlum book is still just kind of surreal.
Yeah, and then next one, that's the is it the Treadstone Exile is the one that's coming up in February. Cool. Can you give us a little hint about the plot line on that one?
Well, it picks up after, if you've read the first one. You don't have to read the first one to understand the second one. It stands on its own, but it begins to unpack Adam Hayes a little bit more. And, this is a guy that was an assassin, and he left Treadstone when he got married and had a child. And so when I was writing the book, I had just had our first child. And so it made me think about a lot of things that I hadn't thought about before as a writer. And, I left the SWAT team after he was born because my wife and now my son were counting on me. And so I didn't want to take a bullet going through a door or anything like that. And so that was on my mind in creating this character. How do you make an assassin likable, but also very human? Because if they've seen the movies or read the books, we know that, Jason Bourne's like this superhuman guy that could memorize something by just looking at it. And so that's what I did with the second Treadstone is he goes to Africa and he's trying to make up for he's been put in exile. He's trying to make up for some of these things he's done in his life. And he gets pulled back into another caper where he finds himself caught in the crossfire again.
And are you still continuing with your other series with Mason Kane and the Search and Destroy?
No, I've gotten a lot of emails about what, are you writing the next one? What's going to happen? I'd like to do that one day. I'm actually working on a kind of a crime book right now, like a cop book, because I was, with the police department for 9 years, and I've always wanted to try my hand at that. So try a little change of genre before starting the next Treadstone.
Oh yeah, that's pretty cool, especially with their background. And that's I think that's something that's so fascinating with your background. I mean, you experienced it. You've been in combat compared to a lot of authors would make this stuff up, but you were actually there. Is that something when you're writing your books? I mean, does for someone like you, does that help you like working through that, or is it like reliving that again? How does that feel for you when you're writing about those combat scenes, because they're very realistic?
Well, with the first one, Clear by Fire is very cathartic, and that's I was diagnosed with PTSD once I got out of the Army, and I've tried to keep that as a theme within my books. Even in Treadstone, he's dealing with post-traumatic stress, and so writing Clear by Fire was very cathartic because I was able to take some of the situations that I had been in and, look, you're writing a narrative, but you're also throwing in your own experiences, and it's after the fact. So you're able to, kind of go a little deeper. What happened there? Why were we at war? Those types of things. And so it doesn't bother me now. But I have a bunch of friends that I send my books to that I was in the military, including my brother. He was in the military, and they'll tell me like, I can't read your books at night because I start to get that sweat and start to feel it. The guys that were in combat, and so it tells me that I'm hitting the right points, like make it as realistic as possible. When these combat vets are like, I started to kind of sweat there at the end, had to put it down and go outside.
Yeah, that's something that I found very vivid with these with your books. It's like you can kind of tell that it's coming from not from a writer who's doing Google research or interviewing people, that someone who was actually there. So it makes it kind of puts it at a whole different level, in my opinion.
Well, I really appreciate that. Hearing that from guys like you and other people who are serious readers and who talk to a lot of authors. You saying that means a lot because it means that I'm on the right track, at least with this thing.
Yeah. And so were you, before you started to your writing career, were you a fan of reading thrillers and books in general?
I was. I've always been an avid reader. And I'm trying to think the first thriller, I kind of grew up. I turned 40 last year, so I guess I'll be 41 soon. But I started off with, the Clancy's, the Dale Browns, Jack Higgins, Clive Cussler, the classics. And then with Vince Flynn, you kind of started to see this change from the Cold War era to the War on Terror, and then you get Brad Thor, Brad Taylor, Mark Graney, who were writing these awesome thrillers about the War on Terror while I was over in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I was able to come back and I tried to, where do I fit into this as a veteran, etc. But I've always tried to, when I was growing up, my dad, he was an artist, a painter, and he would say, okay, you can read these thriller books. He gave me kind of carte blanche to read what I wanted to, which I don't know if that was a good or a bad thing, but he would always balance it by making me read like, okay, now you got to go read the Iliad, or now you have to read, I remember one summer, he'd always give me a reading list over the summer, and one summer he let me read, I can't remember it was like a Mickey Spillane book, but then I had to go read the first volume of like Churchill's life, like he wrote this and so I'm like, this thing's the size of a phone book, and I'm going through it, but I really wanted to read, I think the next book that I was going to read was The Cardinal and the Kremlin, so I'm just like going through this book, like, God, I just want to hurry up, and so he quizzed me afterwards to make sure that I'd actually read the book, and that was, it gives you different sides of the coin, but it was kind of getting onto that next thriller book that got me through some of the drier subjects.
Yeah, that's funny. Like my dad was the same way. He loved the big historical biographies, autobiographies of political figures, and yeah, the first fiction book I started reading was his James Michener books, which were like this big.
Yeah, Texas. I read that one. I used to go spend the summers with my grandparents in California, and they just had this huge, kind of like a library. And that was back when you had the Encyclopedia Britannicas or whatever. And every time I'd ask a question, my grandfather would be like, what does this mean? Like, what does echo mean? He's like, well, go grab the E. And I'm like, oh my God. So you'd have to go over there and grab the encyclopedia and look it up and then go back and tell him. So, but you just start to see these books and there's nothing else to read. There's no kids' books. So it's like, I remember reading Lonesome Dove. I think I was like 13 or whatever. And it was over there and I was like, what's this book about? Well, I had read it. So, pull it off. And it's kind of, reading has always been this escape and meeting these wonderful characters. And I think that if you start out reading early, I feel it's almost natural that you want to try, your hand at it.
Yeah, and what is your writing process like then? Then when you start, do you like when you get the idea and you're getting ready to write it? Do you like outline everything, or do you like write from the seat of your pants, or what's your process like?
Unfortunately, I am more of a pantser, but I'm trying to get into the outlining because I see it's a very critical skill. Because in my opinion, the book is made actually in the editing. But as when you're writing, I write by feel, and so I've always had a hard time. If you write out an outline, where the book's going. And so I'm like, well, I don't want to write this. This is boring. I already know what's going to happen. So I try to write a roadmap of like, this is where I want to go. And I've learned through Ludlum that I need to be more detailed in some aspects, because if you write, for me personally, writing by the seat of the pants, and having ADD, it's like, oh, a squirrel. And then all of a sudden you're writing about something else for like 5,000 words. You're like, crap. This has nothing to do like with what I was doing. And then you got to figure out how to fix it. So it's I look at writing as like you're just solving one problem after the next. You come up with an idea. You're like, I want this to happen, or I'm trying to say this, and I can use the military or whatever, being a law enforcement as like the vehicle. And then you pull out of your driveway and you're driving. And you're like, oh crap. Where do I go now? And so if you have a map, your outline, I need to take a left, but sometimes I'm like, I don't need this map. And then, an hour later, I'm like, now where the hell am I?
Yeah, so I
It's,
saw on your blog, you were saying that like when you're getting those rejections, and you actually took like a lot of the advice, and you have to do things like you said, oh no, 5,000 words out the window. You have to be able to do that, not get too. I found that such a great advice for writers, because sometimes you get so involved in your work, but sometimes you have to just dump it.
well, the two lessons that I learned early, and I've talked to, I get the opportunity to people reach out to me and, hey, will you read, my book, or will you read my manuscript? And, I've been doing this almost 10 years now, and I've been blessed to have such great mentors that I've gotten to learn the inner workings of how this works. And, when I was in Afghanistan, we had a mortar system, which is, you drop a round down and it shoots it out. And we had this guy, he was my platoon sergeant, but he'd been doing it for like 10 years. And one day we'd use this computer to give you, the direction and the distance, and you put that on the site, and that's how you'd shoot it. Well, one time this computer is broken. It's not working. And so the guy, his name was Sergeant Burnett, he actually used a compass to shoot the mortar while there's troops in contact. And it was just like, oh my God, we're using a compass. And, that's how they used to do it back in the day. But like after talking to him afterwards, I realized that he understood the process so deeply, not just every bit about it, that he was able to use, this compass. And so the more you learn about writing books and the more you write it, you begin to understand, like, there's only 7 plots. There's only, this is how you do this is how you do this. But I meet so many people who write books and great books, but that have no audience. They're like, well, I just want to write about clown zombies. And you're like, well, I don't think anybody wants to, that's scary as hell. No one wants to read that book. And they're like, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And then they complain when they don't, no one wants to buy it. And so, they say kill your darlings, and people talk about what that means in a lot of different ways. But I think I'm making, I'm making a promise to a reader. Hey, you're going to put down your money, and I'm going to write a book that you're going to enjoy, and I'm not going to let you down. And that involves sometimes doing things that maybe I don't want to write particularly, like, oh, I'd rather do this, but I know that no one wants to read about that. And so I think one of the biggest steps is you got to think about your reader, think about who's reading this book. And, it's really not about you, even though it is your book. You want to entertain people. And it's like writing a book where they're talking about taxes and COVID. Like, nobody wants to read about that shit. And I think a lot of new writers have a hard time letting go of their ideas when, they some people even take it personally. And I know when I first started out and they're editing and they're like, this gotta go, this whole paragraphs. And you're like, it took a week to write that paragraph. I really liked it. It's not really mine anymore. It's like, okay, that wasn't very good. It's not personal. It's making this book better. And I tell people, there's only so many times you can patch the tire. Sometimes, it takes things that you love, but it's holding your book back, and you just got to throw them away.
And what is your writing process like when you're writing day? What does a writing day look for you? And has it changed a lot because of the pandemic?
Not really. I wake up, about 5:30. Try to get a workout. That's changed because of COVID. It's you can't go to the gym really, so run it in your backyard or run it down the street or whatever. And then I get to the office. And depending where I am, I've started spending a lot more time preparing for books. I used to just get right into it and be like, here's what I want to write about, and start writing. But I'm learning to spend more time at the front end to kind of save me tears at the back end. And then I set a word count for the day, a goal, and then however long it takes. I'm lucky because I've always wanted to be a writer. I love doing this. So If I make my word count early, I just kind of keep going usually, and because I love what I do and love that I've been blessed enough to have this opportunity. But then there's the days where it's a grind, and it's just like, how the hell did I start out this and I just spent 8 hours and I have 2,000 words less than when I started this morning, and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore, but you just kind of got to stick to it and, uh, allow yourself. Myself personally, I do a lot of, self-critiquing, self-correcting, make sure that I'm, not beating myself up too much. Like, we went back a little bit today and hopefully we won't go back tomorrow, but it's all, for me, working towards that state of flow where you're in the zone, and sometimes it takes a lot of work to get there. And sometimes it's just as easy as sitting down, and before you know it, you got 2,000 words for the day, and you're like, oh, that's pretty awesome.
And I always like to ask my guests too about the writing software that they use. Do you use Word? Is that the?
Yeah, I use Word. I tried to use Scrivener. Is that how you say it?
Scrivener. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I tried to use that, but it just it didn't work for me. And the only thing, if anybody listening here, it works for Microsoft, the only thing I don't like about Word is I wish you could move when you go into the view where you have your chapters laid out. Wish you could move the chapters like you can on Scrivener. That's the best thing about Scrivener, but they don't let you do that on Word.
Yeah, that would be that actually would be a great thing that they should you think they could figure out how to do that if Scrivener could figure it out.
Yeah, just
a writer's edition of Word or something.
I wish they would do something because it's like every day I find something new about Word. I was like, holy shit, it does that. And then, but the one thing that I really wanted to do, I can't get it to do it. So back to the old cut and paste, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so Treadstone Resurrection, that's out now, and then the Treadstone Exile, yes, the Treadstone Exile comes out in looks like February of 2021, and then your I really want to recommend the listeners, if you're, because I know I have a lot of aspiring writers that listen to this, to go check out your website. That's probably the best place to find you, the joshuahoodbooks.com.
Right, and we're working. I got behind on books, and so you can't post a lot. I'm working on a little website to kind of add on to that called the Writer's Garage, where so many people have helped me forward. So much advice I've gotten from other writers. I'm trying to set up, give back to the writing community about, this is what I've learned, how to write. There's a million ways to skin a cat, but things that have worked for me, like how do you write an action scene? How do I write an action scene, I guess? I've learned recently that reading people's stuff, that you can kind of tell whether a book's going to be good or not so good within the first 5 pages. And, that's something that hit me a couple years back. And why is that? Why is the first line so important? Why? And, there's common mistakes that you have to learn the hard way. At least I did. And I'd like to, be able to say, hey, if you don't do this, people like that. And that makes everybody happy. So that's something I'm working to put out in the next couple of months.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think it's so cool in the writing community, like you said before. I mean, even among quote unquote competitors, everyone helps each other and it supports each other. I think that's such a cool feature of the writing community.
Oh yeah, it's just it's good for the genre, and we're all kind of in this together. And I hope fans of mine read Mark and Brad Taylor and everybody else like Brad Thor, Jack Carr, and it's just hey, we all love books. We love writing books, and we hope that you guys love reading books. And it's just there's no real reason to be competitive because there's a lot of readers out there that leave reviews. Not to read too many reviews, but I learned a lot by reading negative reviews. I didn't even think about that. That was a great idea to do it that way. So When I do read reviews, it's kind of, sick and twisted, but I only read the negative ones because sometimes they're just being assholes, but sometimes like they have good points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good way to learn. And yeah, you can pick up the negative stuff. People are just complaining about whatever, but sometimes there are some good nuggets in the negative reviews.
Yes, I
Yeah,
believe so. And I believe you always got to be learning, to get better at what you're doing.
yeah. So before I let you go, any final advice that you could offer for aspiring writers who are listening to this?
I would say for a new writer, for me at least, it's all about perseverance. You look at all the percentages and you look at all the, you go into these writers groups, and they're like, 1 out of every 10 people get published, or I got rejected this many times. Like, I don't know who's been rejected more than me, but if you look at facts and figures on a long enough timeline, 1 out of every 10 people, let's say, that's not a direct, I'm just making that up, but I know so many people who've wanted to write a book and they've never started. So obviously, those people aren't going to get published. And then people who write a book and then don't finish it, they're not going to get published. And so I believe it's all about perseverance. You got to believe at the beginning it's a lonely journey. You got to believe in yourself. You got to be motivating yourself. Critiquing yourself. But if you could get past where everybody else stops, you have a great chance of, making your dream into a reality. And a lot of people, everything I believe in my life, it is on the other side of, the excuses. I can't do this. It's not good enough or whatever. Like, what if you can do it? And that's one thing that I would tell myself over and over again as I was writing my, first book is like, well, what if you can? And so for me, the biggest thing is perseverance. And it's something that outworking everybody else is something that I was taught early on, and it's carried over through my writing career. So it's a very long answer to your question, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, well, it's a great answer. So thank you so much, Josh, for your advice and talking about your books and your writing style. It's had a lot of fun talking with you. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me on here. I really appreciate it.